Cast live broadcast. This is Mike from Sunspot and See You on the Other Side coming at you. Hopefully, everyone is having a lovely Sunday out there. Today, we're going to be talking about, well, something that I did not know that much about in the past, but I've learned a lot about just in the past few days of doing research on it, and that is people's paranormal experiences with their pets. And so today we're going to be talking about those paranormal experiences with their pets, psychic animals. We're going to be talking about spirit animals and exactly what that is. And then we just might get to some of those Robert Johnson style hellhounds on the trail. So hope everybody's having a fun Sunday in Wisconsin right now. It is glorious weather and it feels like summer for just like maybe the second time this year. So we're super happy on that. Now, joining me today, of course, is my trusty co-host, Wendy. How you doing out there, Wen?
Hi, I'm doing great, thanks.
Okay, fantastic. And so this is the live recording of our See You on the Other Side podcast. And you might be listening to this in the future, but we have a podcast, othersidepodcast.com, where we talk about paranormal topics. We write songs about it every week. And this week, we're talking about psychic pets and spirit animals. And so we'll start the main recording in just a second. And thanks out there to the people who are watching it live. All right.
Yeah,
So
excellent.
I am recording on this end.
All right, I just need 1 second here,
Sure,
Mike.
absolutely. So,
In the meantime, maybe we can talk about pets that we've had in the past. I'm not currently a pet owner, so my experiences are all through other family members and friends' pets. But I did have a dog growing up, had a little terrier.
all right. Did you ever feel like you had any kind of psychic experience with that pet, Wendy?
I Nothing that I remember, nothing comes to mind. It's possible that one of those things could have happened, and it was so long ago that I wiped it out of my memory at this point. But no, we just had good old classic family pet stories. Lots of chasing him around the neighborhood when he'd run away and stuff like that.
Sure,
So,
sure. Well, I tell you, for myself, I've only had cats in my life, and in my family too. My parents are not what you would call animal lovers.
okay.
So I didn't get my first pet until well after I'd moved out of my parents' house, and then I ended up getting two cats, and I completely did not want those cats. Not
Uh-oh.
not because I didn't
Mike.
not because I didn't love cats or because I didn't think a pet would be wonderful.
Yeah.
I didn't want those pets because my girlfriend at the time, who I was living with, really wanted them, and she wasn't quite up to the responsibility levels, let's say, for taking care of pets.
Nice.
Hey, if she's watching this now, she knows it. Um, but the
That's
thing,
fair.
but the thing is that so I was, she's like, I'm gonna go off and get a cat. I'm like, no, you're not. Please do not go get a cat. I said, but please do not go get a cat. And so what does she do? She gets a cat. Not only one, but she brings back two cats. And she's
Ooh,
like, see, I brought back two cats, one for me and
twice as nice.
one for you. How wonderful is that? And I'm thinking, oh God. But yeah, I love those cats. I love those cats. I love those cats. In fact, I love them so much that after we broke, I say a year after we broke up, and she wasn't able to take care of them anymore because she requested the cats on the way out. Um,
Mm.
I said, okay. She requested the cats on the way out. I actually took them back, and I was living with a different guy at the time, but I had a condo that I was renting out. And so it was between renters. And so those cats just lived at a condo for a while. And people would make fun of me because I was the guy with a cat condo. Um,
All right.
they'd be like, you're the guy with a condominium full of cats, right? And I'd be like,
You're like not the cat lady, but like the cat guy.
I was the cat carrier. Um, okay. Oh, and here's Chuck. He's like, technically, she followed your instructions. She didn't get a cat. Well,
Nice. Okay, that's true.
that is absolutely right, Chuck. She did not get a cat, did she? She ended up getting two cats. but the thing is, I did love those cats. I named my first, and so this is if you guys ever try to steal my identity, you'll be able to use this because whenever they ask you the name of your first pet, I always type the name of my first pet, and that's Poe, was my cat. And so I sure did love him. And eventually, when they were about, I think they were about 6 years old, and I had to get them out of the cat condo. What I did was I put up an ad in Craigslist, and this old grandmother calls me, and she says, I saw your thing for cats, and my grandson had a cat, and he got killed crossing the road, and they live on a farm, and I would love to take those cats to my grandson. And so I have this dream that Poe and Maximus ended up on the farm. So the actual proverbial farm that people talk about when they say that's where, when you tell your kid the dog died, no, he's off on a farm somewhere and he's super happy. That is the truth that happened to my pets. And now I have two cats, Zoli and Mr. Spock are the cats we have in our house today. And so they're a lot of fun. But we'll be talking about more pet stories in a little bit as we start episode 297 of the See You on the Other Side podcast and talk about psychic pet stories. I had no idea that so many people had psychic pet stories until we reached out to see like who out there has these kind of stories. And I would say that, there's a huge amount of people out there that have these incredible stories about their pets. And I was fairly amazed by that. Just the connection that we feel with our animals obviously is extremely powerful. And so much so that, that when they pass, we tend to see them, talk to them, hang out with them, even from beyond the grave. And it's not in a scary Pet Cemetery way. It's in a positive way in a lot of ways. Not that there aren't a few scary stories associated, and not that people haven't, associated them with animals, over the years. All right. So while we're hanging out for a little bit and getting all the stuff ready for the live broadcast, if you are watching on YouTube, thank you very much for hanging out with the See on the Other Side podcast. And just wondering, everybody's been watching Tiger King over the past, couple of months. Tiger King seemed to have been the show du jour of house arrest and lockdown. And so, Wendy, did you and Scott have a chance to watch Tiger King? Oh, looks like I can't hear you guys. So we're losing that. Okay, so they're going to come back and tell us all about the Tiger King. But all right, so anybody out there, if you watch the Tiger King, that's where you see how people, that's how you really see that not only do people, want to spend time with like regular animals, domesticated animals, like we talk about the cat, we talk about the dog, even horses, fairly domesticated, but they also have crazy desires for wild animals and want to spend time with them, and the allure of wild animals and how that can bring people in. I really found that fascinating about Tiger King was the fact that people were that Jeff Lowe guy, he was able to like get girls to come up to his hotel room and stuff like that by saying you want to pet a tiger. Because the thing is, if I would have thought about that in college, well, I'd have gotten a pet tiger. But I didn't, so here's where we are. And I ended up with a girl who just went out and got some cats and made my life difficult. But the thing is that Tiger King really showed us our human obsession with the wild kingdom, our human obsession with animals. And there was drama associated with that. But it got into people's relationship with animals. And sometimes we have a loving, custodial relationship, stewardship kind of thing with animals as people, I guess, with the Department of Natural Resources feel. And then you also get people who, well, they have a financial relationship with creatures, and that's kind of what we got with Tiger King. All right, I can hear you on your level now there. So, Scott,
You can.
Scott, tell us about what kind of animals that you had in your house growing up.
We were always a dog family with multiple dogs. But I remember you mentioned earlier, name of your first pet. I don't know if you explicitly said it, but the idea, you come up with your porn name of the first pet and the street you grew up on.
Oh, yeah.
That makes me Buffy Washington.
Ooh,
I'm totally fine with that.
Nice.
That's a pretty good one.
Yeah.
I guess I'd be Poe Meadowview.
That's interesting. It sounds so
What kind of movies? What kind of porn movies you think Poe Meadowview stars in?
Meadowview, retro for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
But,
Not a lot of Brazilian waxes in those films.
No, there's got to be that Meadowview. But yeah, usually ankle biter, little dogs. I've had a couple Cocker Spaniels through the years, a miniature pincher, miniature schnauzer. We've had one cat. We historically weren't a cat family. My dad was super allergic to cats, or is super allergic to cats, but we ended up taking one in that needed a home, and fortunately, for whatever reason, my dad was not allergic to it, so that worked out.
All right.
But yeah,
it's funny. A funny thing and this is one of the reasons that I wanted to talk about animal stories this week, or pet animal stories, is because I was doing a thing with WLS on Friday, and I was looking at old pictures, and I remembered I had a WLS T-shirt with like animal stories on it, and I was like, "Oh yeah, I used to love listening to animal stories, even though we never could have a pet because my parents hated pets." And so it was like, I always was something I was interested in. So anyway, we're working on some technical stuff right now, so we're just kind of hanging out, and if you guys out there, before we get to the actual live podcast taping, if anybody out there has any questions or thoughts that we can bring up before we actually get to the taping, that would be awesome. This is actually the best time for Q&A, because
sorry, I'm having some technical problems here.
Right, and
that seems to always be like clockwork, right when we go live.
Right. So the thing is, while we prepare getting the show ready to discuss, now is just the time that I guess. I mean, my thoughts on animals are well known as a vegetarian, but it is, But the thing is, I often find that the people that have the most interest in taking care of animals or taking care of the environment are actually people who do hunting, which I think is funny. I mean, it's the Teddy Roosevelt model.
Well, it's in their interest to keep animals out there alive, so they can kill them.
Somewhat, but also, I do understand. I do understand the allure of hunting and the circle of life and that whole idea. Just in this past couple of weeks, when you had to hear that there's like a chicken farm in the East Coast that had to kill 2 million chickens because they had nobody to sell their chickens to. You're like, well, that's somebody sitting and waiting for an animal and hunting it in the wild is much more closer to Mufasa and Simba's circle of life.
Nice.
Than it is to have to kill 2 million chickens.
Right.
While they're waiting to be sent to, Tyson to be mashed up into nuggets. And so that kind of thing, even though I'm a veggie, I've always had I think I have a respect for hunting, because I think that hunting is something we've been evolved to do. Chuck, good. Okay, here's a good question. What are your thoughts on animal pet reincarnation, like a dog's purpose? I might talk about this in the episode too when we get to the live recording, but also I do. I've never experienced the animal reincarnation, but my mother-in-law has, and so my wife.
Is this my mother-in-law is a dog joke? Slow wind up.
Hey, no, but so when my wife was a little girl, she really wanted a cat, and they already had a dog, and they didn't, her parents didn't want to give her a cat. But what my wife would do as a little girl is that she saw like a stray cat in the neighborhood, and they lived in the middle of nowhere, Illinois, and she would find the stray cat, and then she'd give it food, like little meat or things like that, from home, to try to get it to follow her. And so she eventually got the cat to follow her home on most days. And then she would like leave a little saucer of milk for it in the garage and that whole kind of thing. And eventually she, would tell her parents like, hey, this cat just followed me home. I don't know what happened. I don't know how he got here, but she did. And so what are we going to do now that she just wants to hang out here? Can we keep her? And her parents eventually said, yes, we can keep her. And so the very creative name of Kitty. But so Kitty lasted 19 years. Lasted beyond when my wife went to college. And I think almost to the time I had met her, because I'd met her right after she graduated college. And then Kitty passed away at 19 years old, which is pretty good.
Oh, yeah.
For a cat. And so, but my mother-in-law says that there's a bunny in the backyard that chases other animals around in the same way, that sits there and looks at her in the kitchen window, the exact same way that Kitty used to do when she was alive. So my mother-in-law's like, I don't know what it is, but I think that Kitty's back, but as a bunny and in the backyard.
Aww.
So
you guys, Oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say. So
we're ready to record now with me.
Pet reincarnation is all right with me.
Well, I remember this is on the topic. A few years ago, you guys had on. Oh God, I'm blanking on his name now for some reason. Oh, Dan Gordon, who wrote the Haunted Baseball.
Oh yeah.
And he has a story in there. I think it was maybe it was Jim Thome, but back when he was with the Cleveland Indians, that they had a coach that passed away. I don't know if it was in season or after one season, but then the following year, there was like a pigeon that followed the team around, and I think it was Jim Thome. One of the players was absolutely convinced that it was their coach that had come back.
That is interesting.
The following season.
Oh man, that's one way to keep track of the team.
Yeah. You got to keep following through.
Right.
Pigeons.
Well, yes, Chuck. Reincarnation. Right, pretty close. Pretty close. Well, I mean,
nice.
And the thing is, we were joking about that last night. My wife and I were having a fire, and because it was a beautiful night last night, we were having a fire, drinking beer after our daughter fell asleep. Thank you, God. And I was asking her about, because she's always been a pet person, an animal lover, like that kind of stuff. And she's like, oh, yeah, well, you can tell this story that my mom thought that Kitty might have been reincarnated. I'm like, all right,
that's
then.
a good one.
Chuck, that's a good one. Mark, hi, guys. I'm always interested in how alive pets interact with spirit animals.
Oh.
And we're definitely going to be talking about ghost pets coming up. We got a whole bunch of stories. And we're actually about ready to record the live podcast right
Finally.
now. So thank you, everybody, for sticking with us as we're coming through. Like the fun part is, though, is that doing this on YouTube is a fun way to, because we always do this on Skype, so we try not to talk over each other. But now we're doing it on YouTube. It gives that extra pressure of like, okay, don't talk over each other and don't look stupid at the same time.
Well, I'm going to head out.
Hey. Oh, I didn't have the soundboard up, so I couldn't do the clap. Okay.
Nice.
All right. So we're going to start. So everybody, this is the, you get a little bit of inside baseball here. And so this is the part where we clap, and we do that because that signals not only the start of the podcast, but that's also how we sync things up. Because when you see that big, in the waveform, you see a big thing that takes up the whole wave, you realize on both channels that that's where we both started talking at the same time. So let's get it together and start things up. And thanks, everybody, for joining us for today's talk about the paranormal and the wild kingdom.
All right.
Two,
three.
See You on the Other Side podcast, episode 297, Psychic Pets and Spirit Animals. Today, Wendy and I are joined by Scott Marcus from whatsyourghoststory.com. And we're excited today to talk about the paranormal experiences that people have had with their pets.
Yes, a listener suggested topic, by the way.
Right.
Thank you, Chuck.
Yes, thank you. Chuck's a Patreon, and when Patreons have topic suggestions, well, they're the first ones to get those answered.
When they say jump, you guys say
we definitely go, hi. So the thing is that people have a lot more experiences with the ghosts of animals than I thought they did. When you're a kid, it goes back to your very basic thing of, like, if your pet dies when you're a kid, you ask your mom or your dad, you're like, is Fluffy going to heaven? Like, I mean, and
it depends on if Fluffy accepted Jesus into his heart.
That's true, right? It's always like, well, was Fluffy aware of any mortal sin before he passed?
Yeah.
But that is a great question, because you have this idea that, well, humans have souls. Do animals have souls? Because if animals have souls, that puts an entire question on what we're supposed to, how do we treat the animal kingdom, and how far down does it go? Does it go from apes to cats to, do insects?
Snails.
Right, snails. If insects have souls, I'm going to hell.
Oh, man. Seriously.
Right? I've ate those cricket bars.
Oh, we heard what you did to the centipede, Mike.
Right. I had a centipede versus spider gladiatorial combat in my bathroom sink. But those ideas are important because, I mean, it's the philosophy of what levels of sentience do we think go on after death?
Mm-hmm.
And we definitely treat our pets like they're members of the household, like they're family members, always.
For sure.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And so the idea is, if that energy, if that energy's gone, or if the physical form is gone, does the energy somehow live on? And I gotta say, just coming right out, putting out a call to Facebook and Twitter for, like, who's got a haunted pet story? People came in right away. Starting with Twitter, random user sends me a message, and he's like, I've got a pet paranormal story for you. It happened in December 2006. My pet's name was Shadow. She was short hair, all black Dachshund. That's a wiener dog, for those of you that don't... Dachshund. Oh, I can tell I'm not a dog owner, right? She was an all-hair, all-black wiener dog. She was 12 when she passed. Early evening, Friday, December 8th, my daughter, Holly, and me noticed Shadow in the backyard acting odd. She was standing still but appeared to be stretching her neck upward, as if trying to elongate her neck as much as possible. My vet's office had just closed, so he immediately drove Shadow to the only emergency animal hospital in the area, about a 20-minute drive. An x-ray showed Shadow's trachea was wavy, not straight. That's why she was elongating her neck. She was trying to get air into her as best as she could.
Aww.
The vet put her on oxygen and sent us home. I got a call from the vet around 2 a.m. the next morning saying Shadow will die if she is taking off oxygen. We went to the hospital and let Shadow go peacefully. We brought her home and buried her in her beloved backyard. This was now Saturday, December 9th, the day Holly graduated from college. Yeah, I was crying so hard that day, people wouldn't look at me. I was a junkyard mess. I joked with Holly to leave it to Shadow to upstage her graduation. Fast forward a few days, I was at the stove cooking bacon. Shadow and our other dog, Sassy, always watched me cook bacon, hoping I would somehow drop it all in their mouths.
Oh, they love bacon.
I looked to my right and saw Sassy. I looked to my left for Shadow and just stared at the floor. I started bawling. Then I heard a sound I was so very familiar with. When Shadow wanted to go in the backyard, she would swipe at the mini blinds on the back door if they were down. She'd swipe, I'd hear the noise and see the blinds moving. As I was cooking bacon and crying, I heard that sound. I looked at Sassy. She was looking at the door. I turned to look at the door. The blinds were moving.
Oh.
The thing is, they were pulled up about halfway. So my shadow girl paid us a visit one last time.
Oh man, that was a good story. That gave me
Yeah.
the whole full body shiver up the spine.
And that's the thing, is that, you have those experiences where you see it and the dog sees it too.
Yeah.
And we'll talk a little bit more about that, because actually one of my calls on Twitter looking for animal stories came back with a book called Animal Ghosts. And Animal Ghosts is written by a Dublin writer, Elliot O'Donnell, in 1913. And in 1913, he had collected, I'd say, dozens of animal ghost stories from people, and he published it in a book. And we'll get to a story from Animal Ghosts in a second. But he also goes into the different ways that people were saying that their pets experienced psychic phenomena, and that their pets were part of the supernatural world. And people were talking about this 107 years ago. And so it's fun to see that. Actually, who told me about it and who sent me a link to it was our friend Brian Showers.
Oh, a Dubliner himself.
A Dubliner himself. And we used to live with him at a house in Madison during college. And Brian writes ghost stories and has a publishing press in Ireland where he publishes other people's ghost stories. And we've had him talking about Victorian literature before on the show, and spiritualism and the 19th century. Okay, so that was a story from Twitter. From Facebook, I also got a ghost pet story. This one in particular, he asked not to share his name, but he said, "You're welcome to tell a story." And so he said, years ago, 2002. Years ago now. 2002 is the future as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
Well, that's a fully grown person, right? 18 years.
Right. I worked as a line prep cook at a little diner in a small town in south central Wisconsin. The place had quite a history, and at one point it burned down, but I didn't know that yet. There were 3 times when I entered the dining area and swear up and down that for a split second I saw a black cat. At one point it was on a table, and I meant to tell whoever owned it, it was after hours and it was just employees in there, that they couldn't have a pet in the restaurant. When I looked back, it was gone. After some back and forthing, I found out that the restaurant had burned down at one point, obviously rebuilt afterwards, and the owner's cat was there at the time and didn't make it.
Aww.
Sad. It was a black cat. I didn't know what to make of it, but I wasn't allowed pets in the apartment I was living in, and I'm a cat person. I waited until everyone left, and then I asked the cat if it wanted to come home with me. So he asked the ghost cat if he wanted to come home. Now, I'd love to say that when I put a saucer of cream out, it was gone the next morning, but that didn't happen. What I did notice was that periodically, when I was sitting on the couch, I'd feel the distinct feeling of a cat rubbing up against my legs. It was so natural that to me, I'd reach down to pet it, and nothing was there. I'll point out here that I hadn't felt the sensation since I had moved into the apartment. Only after I asked the, quote, ghost cat, unquote, if it wanted to come home with me, did it appear. So that's the story of me and my adopted ghost cat. It didn't seem to come with me after I moved, but every once in a while I wonder what happened to it. I hope it found peace. So that's a nice story coming in about a ghost cat and like what people have experienced. Cool. Let me tell you one more, and this is from 1913. This is from a letter that was written to Elliot O'Donnell. And this is from Charles A. Thompson, Chicago, Illinois, USA. Had to write a story to a guy all the way in Dublin, Ireland, looking for paranormal pet stories. And so it's weird. Like, what does a 1913 voice sound like? Like the old newsreels, right? 5 years ago, we had a little puppy about 6 months old. So you want to say it like that. Some 5 years ago, we had a little puppy about 6 months old. I used to train him to always go round the back way to come into the house. One day he got hurt and run over, instantly killed by a streetcar. A day or two after the accident, I was going in my front door and I saw the dog go up the steps in front of me as plain as I ever saw him in my life. It seemed he knew that I had taught him he must not go in the front way, because he would go a few steps and then turn around and look at me, as though he wanted to see how I was taking it. And I positively saw him go the full length of the hall into the house, a distance of about 20 feet, before he disappeared. I saw him do this at least 3 times in 2 months that we stayed in that flat. I told at least half a dozen people of the incident at the time it happened, and I can vouch for its authenticity. I remain yours truly, Charles A. Thompson, Chicago, Illinois, United States of America. But, things like that. Number one, I love like reading old letters. And one of the reasons I love reading old letters is because people knew how to write letters.
Oh, yeah. So true.
And so when you read an old letter, you're not just like nobody's using like for instead of FOR or like the letter U instead of YOU. They're not, cutting off the actual conversation. They're writing a full thing.
Right.
And so
and they had limited resources of paper and ink, so they thought more carefully about what was in the letter.
They made it count.
Right.
Well, why don't I read one more story from Animal Ghosts, and we'll talk a little bit more Animal Ghosts in a bit. And let's go to an experience that happened in 1906. And this is Mrs. Vincent Taylor's experience, and it's titled A Spirit Purr. One evening in February 1906, my son and I were quietly reading In Full Gaslight. In Full Gaslight. I love it.
Oh, wow.
Our small gray cat lying on the sofa a short distance from where I sat. Suddenly, I saw on my knee a large red and white cat which belonged to us in India, which was very dear family friend and fond of us as a child. Leaving India, we were obliged to give him to a friend, and in the end, he shared the usual fate of pets in that country, making a meal for some wild animal. Roofy Oofy, in his spirit shape, purred vigorously, rubbing his head against me and giving every sign of delight at seeing us again. I did not speak, but in a few minutes my son looked up and said, "Mother, Roofy Oofy is on your knee." When the spirit cat jumped down and went to him to be petted. Then he returned to me and walked along the sofa to where our present cat, Kim, was asleep. The spirit cat, with a look of almost human fun, patted Kim's head, the latter awakening with a start. Roofy Oofy, that name is killing me.
Yeah.
I love it.
Roofy Oofy continued to make playful dabs at Kim's ears, Kim following each movement with glaring eyes, distinctly seeing and realizing that another cat was invading his sofa, but not in the least angry with him and quite ready to play. After a few minutes, the spirit cat came back to my knee, whereupon the earth cat displayed jealousy, which Roofy Oofy resented, but before they came to actual words, the spirit cat retired behind the veil.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's just fun to look back and see, people sharing those kind of stories, over 100 years ago, that they had seen that same kind of thing.
Also, I think that's a little bit of evidence, if you will, that animals are kind of used to seeing things from the other side come through. Like, it didn't freak out, like, oh my God, there's a ghost cat here. It's like, just yet another ghost.
Right.
Right. Well, and animals in general can have the same kind of spiritual or haunted experiences that humans can. Speaking of that, we have an interesting story that was called in from an animal communicator. And this is coming from Tara in North Dakota, and she called her story in. And so let's play the story of Fluffy and Cindy, and how Tara, the animal communicator, was able to relay a message from the spirit world through Fluffy the dog.
Hi, this is Tara Argle calling, and my story involves animals and a man in spirit. I've been a animal communicator all of my life, and I had a client reach out to me to visit with her dog. And so in visiting with her dog, we'll call her Cindy and we'll call her dog Fluffy. She called me to find out, she didn't tell me right off the bat. So I connected with Fluffy like I usually do. And then her question was to ask Fluffy, where did the tennis ball go? So when I connected with Fluffy about the tennis ball, he told me that he had swallowed it. And so when I told that to Cindy, she said, oh my gosh, well, I know that he did, but here's the story. So what had happened is her daughter was playing with her dog and her daughter's dog. And they were playing with a tennis ball, a smaller one. And the tennis ball went behind the chair and they never found it again. And Fluffy had gone back to get it and came out and they never saw it again. So they had taken Fluffy to the vet and had an x-ray done. And sure enough, Fluffy had swallowed the tennis ball. They could see it very clearly in the x-ray. And so the vet, this was a smaller town, so the vet took the dog home overnight and was going to do surgery on Fluffy in the morning to take the tennis ball out. But what was interesting is when she called me, this was pre-this. What happened was the vet had taken the dog home, and then in the morning, before surgery, they did another x-ray just to see for sure where the tennis ball was, and it was nowhere to be found. Like, it was totally gone. And so the vet was perplexed, like, how come it was there yesterday, but it's not there today? So they never did do surgery. So Cindy had called me post this, asking what happened to the tennis ball, and the dog said I swallowed it. But what happened in our session is when I was visiting with Fluffy and Cindy, a man appeared in spirit and dressed in kind of farm clothes, and I described it to Cindy, and I said, does this make sense? And she said, well, my gosh, that's my dad. And her dad proceeded to give me a message and tell me that he is the one who had taken the tennis ball out of Fluffy and had done that so that she would reach out to me and so that I could get a message to her. And the message was that the dad was concerned about Cindy because she was very depressed, because she was working hard, not taking good care of herself, taking care of her grown children's pets and grandkids, so on and so forth. So the dad had taken the tennis ball out so that she would reach out to me and I could give her the message. And her dad wanted her to know how much he loved her and was sorry that he had never told her so, and felt like that was playing into her mental health and her feelings of worthiness. And it was a very beautiful session that ended in tears. Fluffy was fine. The ball was removed by the dad. I'm not sure how that happened, but they had x-rays to prove it. But it was a beautiful story of a dad needing to get a message to his daughter. And did that through their animal companion. So thank you and goodbye.
All right. Thank you, Tara, for calling that in.
Yeah.
Now, was she the one that we saw at Michigan Paracon?
I'm not sure. We met her through Dean McMurray.
Yeah, the only reason I ask is because she's from North Dakota, and so therefore, kind of in the Midwest. And I remember, I think it was the first year we went there, actually. We saw a lady give a whole presentation about animal communication.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if maybe that was her. But
yes, and there's this whole meditation.
Right.
Where like your pets would appear to you in the meditation.
Yeah.
And a pet appeared, my Poe appeared to me. Weird.
There you go.
Weird. So thank you for calling that in, Tara. And okay, an animal communicator, someone that can talk to pets or kind of pick up on them, like Robert Redford and the Horse Whisperer.
Yeah.
I have zero experience with pet psychics. But there are a lot of people I know have called pet psychics, have even done things where they're like, hey, the pet psychic needs to put the phone by your head or whatever to the dog to get some kind of message from it. And so now, Scott, you've got an experience with a pet psychic, right? And so you've called a pet psychic, or your family's used one before?
So it was, unfortunately, I wasn't there. I really wish I was, because this sounds so amazing, and we ended up learning about a lot. But it was a block party, some entertainment scheduled for a block party, where my parents live. They like everybody on the street has dogs. It's a suburban house, suburban neighborhood. Everybody's got pets. So yeah, really fun idea to have a pet psychic come out and give everybody readings. And at this time, we had
Oh,
I think
so the pet psychic was just coming out to have fun, like people bringing their dogs around, and the pet psychic was like there, like a tarot card reader at a
Right.
party.
exactly,
Okay,
yeah.
cool.
And they actually she didn't need the pets to be present. So she could just meet with you, and the psychic could just tell you what's going on with your pets at home. Which, again, everything on the face of it is like, well, it's so easy to fake this. I mean, it just seems so like it's hard to really let yourself believe certain things because you're used to being taken advantage of, I guess. It would be
Yeah.
pretty easy to say like, well, this dog really likes balls and treats.
Right. Right.
Well, they
Have you ran?
Yeah.
I see that you've ran around with your dog outside. Oh,
Yeah.
right. Loves
It likes
trees.
walks, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But there were a couple of just really unique things. She said, your dog Reggie, who's I don't know if she was predicting names. I don't think so. But the Cavalier King Charles, who rest in peace, just passed away about a week ago, a little over a week ago. She said
Oh, your family just lost a dog?
We did just
Oh,
lose
cry. I'm sorry, Scott.
a family
That's
member.
a hard thing. That's a really hard thing. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And he was with us for about 11 years and just a sweetheart. But he really thinks a lot of himself. He thinks he's very pretty. That's why when he's very excited, he spins in a circle really fast because he thinks that he looks even better when his colors kind of swirl. And my mom's like, he does do that. I mean, that's an odd little thing. And the one of the most striking things was reading up the cat, which again, you can't read a cat. The cats have the best poker faces on the planet. They just
Right.
don't give up.
Yeah, they just look at you like they don't like you all the time.
Yeah. And she said your cat wants to go outside, but you have a deck in the back behind your house, right? And like, yeah, we do have a deck. Like the cat just wants to go and lay in the sun out on that deck. It won't run away. Like, well, we'll give
How
it a
much do you
shot.
trust this person?
Exactly. And you weigh that against how much you like the cat. Sorry, it's cat jokes. And so my parents tried it. Like, okay, well, we'll leave the back door open and see what Leo, the cat, wants to do. And that's what it did. It laid out on the back porch, on the deck. So I don't know, just so wild. We never would have done that. We are not cat owners up until this moment. So we were this is an indoor only cat until that time. And then, yeah, it never ran away. It just kind of hung out back there. So the woman does the reading with everybody in the neighborhood. They get their pets read. And eventually my mom is making small talk with the woman saying, hey, just so you know, my son has written a book on ghost stories. I mean, this kind of stuff is what we're really into. We love the ghost stories.
Sure.
And she's like, okay, well, now that I know you're okay with this kind of conversation, I picked up on something else that I held to myself because I thought it might upset you. And she said, Reggie sees the spirit of a man in your house, and it's upsetting to him. And so he will go to my mom had an office, a home office, and it was in the basement. And the psychic talked about the layout of our house, not knowing, not seeing it, anything like this. She said, your basement stairs kind of go up into the kitchen, right? I'm like, yeah, that's true. It's like, well, Reggie will stand at the foot of the stairs and look up and see the man in that area. And that's upsetting to him. And my mom was like, yeah, Reggie will stand at the foot of the stairs and growl up at nothing at the top of the staircase.
And then she's like, and this is now upsetting to me.
Yeah.
No, I just made that up. But
No,
wow.
It was amazing. Like, oh, well, we thought maybe he was hearing something outside and yada, yada. But now we understand why he does this action. I don't know. That was mind blowing. It's like, okay, I guess I believe in pet psychics.
All right. That's pretty good. Well, I love stories like that where you take something where you're like, okay, because I remember the first time I heard about a pet psychic, and I'm like, get out of town,
Yeah.
But I also didn't believe animals had souls at the time.
Yeah.
Right. But I never had a pet, so I didn't know. So
Sure.
that whole idea. But that's a pretty cool story. Getting that little validation, because the thing is, even if she's just like, well, here's a certain thing. So you guys have that home, like in the kitchen, right? And he just stands up there and looks at the ghost of a man, and that's what I see him doing. You're just like, damn.
Right.
Yeah.
I didn't want to know that. I didn't know we had a ghost upstairs. What are you doing to me?
Yeah. Well, we've had nothing major, but we've had incidences at the house, paranormal, unexplainable stuff for many, many years. And one of my other favorite little stories that I kind of forget to tell because it was really small. I was sitting in the basement with a couple of friends. We had a little, kind of like a living room entertainment room type thing in the basement. And I think this was our previous Cocker Spaniel. And if anybody has ever owned a Cocker Spaniel, you know that they are heavy sleepers and they're dedicated sleepers. They are out like a light. And so this dog was sleeping on kind of like the back of the couch. And my friends and I were just hanging out talking. And then this dog awoke out of a dead sleep and started growling at the ceiling and just followed, like tracking something as it went away, as it traveled across the ceiling. And then just kind of looked around like, oh, that was weird, and went back to sleep. Like, what the hell was that, too?
Right.
Yeah. And oh, go ahead, Wayne.
Well, I was just gonna mention that animals, their senses are so much more acute than ours. So whatever it is they're picking up on, it always feels freaky to me because it always seems like the cat or the dog or whatever is like staring at something behind you and then, very intently. And it's like, okay, what is that? What's going on there? And you don't know. You don't know if maybe it's smelling something or it's hearing something that's out of our frequency range or what, or maybe it's seeing something paranormal or picking up on some kind of energy or whatever that we can't pick up on. But it always feels like they know something we don't.
Well, interestingly, in Elliot O'Donnell's book about animal ghosts, he says, from endless experiments made in haunted houses, I have proved to my own satisfaction, at least, that the cat acts as a thoroughly reliable psychic barometer. And he puts that, but the idea in the book that he brings forth is that the cat is used to paranormal phenomena and so isn't shocked by it. But the dog can see paranormal phenomena and is bothered by it. And so the cat sees something weird and it's like, oh man, whatever. But the dog's like, a ghost, like Scooby-Doo.
Yeah.
And and so it's a funny thing that he talks about this in this book 100 years ago. Well, speaking of animals and the kind of powers that they can have, one thing that I have thought I would never be talking about as something that applied to me is spirit animals. And so have you guys had anything in particular where a certain animal has come up or you've seen or has showed up in your life more than you thought it was going to be?
I can't say that I have.
Yeah, not me.
Okay. Well, it definitely happened to me last November. And so, like this particular story, when I think about it, so last November, somebody that I knew from high school and a person that was one of the tour guides for American Ghost Walks passed away suddenly as a result of a car accident. And, we weren't super close or anything like that at all. We knew each other well in high school, but then after high school, kind of drifted apart and then just found each other through Facebook when we started a ghost tour and she was interested in being a guide. And great girl, loved her in high school. And then most of our conversations happened through text and stuff like, hey, hope the tour is going well. Let me know if you need anything, blah, 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 kind of thing. But she was killed in a car accident last November. Like tragic, horrible kind of thing. I would say, within 2 weeks after her passing, I was walking out on my back porch, and I was about to go do a podcast interview, the interview with Corin Grillo and her Angel Academy kind of thing. And so I go on my back porch. It's a sunny day, sunny November day, and I see a hedgehog in the yard. I immediately recognize it as a hedgehog because the spikes, the whole thing, it's light colored. And I'm like, huh, look at that. There's a hedgehog in the backyard.
Yeah.
So weird.
And it looks at me for a few seconds. And then it runs under the deck. And I'm like, huh, okay. So I text my wife. I'm like, we're going to have to check on some stuff because I think there's a hedgehog under the deck.
Which is not a common pest for Wisconsin.
I was going to say, are they wildly living in this area?
No, that's the thing. My wife's like,
Yeah, not at all.
hedgehogs don't live in Wisconsin. And I'm like,
Right.
well, there's a hedgehog under the deck. And she's
In the
like,
pet
one,
store
yeah.
they do, maybe.
are you sure it wasn't? And then she sends me like 4 or 5 different animals.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, it was none of those things. And she goes, well, then it must be somebody's escaped pet because hedgehogs don't live in North America. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And then I look it up. I'm like, oh, no, they don't live in North America. I'm like, that's weird. It must be somebody's escaped pet. About 15 minutes later, I realized, like, the girl that had passed, the woman that had passed, I think her as a girl because I mostly knew her, 20-some years ago. But she's, only a couple years younger than me. So, the woman that had passed, she had 2 hedgehogs she absolutely loved. And that was like her Facebook pictures and stuff like
Yeah.
that were all of the hedgehog.
Their family Christmas card. Because I was friends with her too.
Yes, the Christmas card was a hedgehog.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting there going, wait. And this is right before is right before the interview. So like I have only like a minute to think about it before I have to go on air. And I'm like, oh my God. I can't. Like, was that a message? And then I'm like, it probably was just an animal that escaped or whatever. Never saw it again. Never around the yard. Never anything. And there's some people let their cats out in the neighborhood. So whenever there's any kind of rodent or something like that under the deck, like there's the next door neighbor's cat, they don't pay attention to their cat or whatever. Like it comes over and then like will creep under the deck to look for that rodent. It never looked for the hedgehog or anything like that. Never saw it again. But the hedgehog kept showing up in different places. We'd be at the pet store to get kitty litter, and I'd go with my daughter on Sunday mornings to the pet store because she liked to see all the fish. And then she would just grab a toy and then be like, Daddy, and then like squeeze it until it made a noise, and it'd be the hedgehog. I'm like, oh. Or she would take a stamp. She'd be like working on stamps that my mother gave her, and she'd be like, Daddy, and it'd be the hedgehog. And I'm like, I didn't even know we had hedgehog stamps.
Yeah.
It's like all these little things just kept on going in repeat to see this. And I don't know the spirit animal stuff like that. But by the time, we all went to the funeral a couple weeks later, it felt like, well, I didn't want to say anything to her mom or something like that. Even though her mom came up and said to me, I was the last guy through the line. Because I got there late, and her mom was like, "Oh, Mike, the ghost tour. If she could come back and haunt us, that she'd be haunting us." And all I could think was, "I think she is."
Nice.
I didn't want to say anything in that kind of position. You don't want to be like, "Well, oh my God," but
You just don't know how she'll react. Yeah.
right. But I felt like I got a reaction. I felt like someone was trying to contact me, and I've never felt like that before. And
Yeah,
so,
that's amazing.
So some kind of spirit animal, that idea that something shows up in more than one place, and you should look at what that means. That's a First Nations idea, a Native American idea. That idea of a spirit animal that it'll appear to you in a dream. That you'll see it in different places, that you have a connection to that animal in more than one place. And my wife's totally in with spirit animals. Like, she had a whole thing with coyotes on the west side of Madison a couple of years ago. Where she's like, wherever I went, I saw a coyote. And she's like, I have no idea why. She would go for runs on the west side and she would see coyotes. And she's like, I have no idea, but I got to look up what it means.
Yeah, especially because it's pretty populated in the, it's not like you're out in the country or out in the desert or something.
Right. Why would she go out for a run and see a coyote like several times in a month?
Yeah.
And she was, we were talking about it last night when I was talking about the podcast, and she's like, I know. She's like, I think about it like a horoscope. You read your horoscope and then you do some kind of self-analysis from it because it helps you analyze or get some kind of self-reflection that might be useful in your life. Mm-hmm. And she goes, I saw the coyote several times, and for some reason, once I read about the message of the coyote or whatever, I felt like it helped me through what I was going through.
That's awesome. And also, it would be one thing to say, oh boy, what an odd coincidence. I've seen a coyote a few times. Something more than that happened. I mean, it obviously resonated with her on some level that she felt something stronger than I just saw an animal. Yeah. It's like I was meant to see this animal.
Right. And I never bought any of this stuff. Like, not that I didn't think that, well, I tell you what, one time I did get superstitious when we were driving home from Viroqua.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. That was such a weird night.
I was thinking about bringing that up, but I wasn't sure I should.
Yeah. So speaking of spirit animals, like the only spirit animal I've ever seen a bunch, the only time it was the, and we'll talk more about a weird experience I had in Ireland in a second, but was the hedgehog, and that seemed to be some kind of message. I don't
Yeah, when you told me that happened,
I don't know if it was a real message. You know what I mean? But the thing is, it gave me some kind of comfort, so it worked.
Yeah. The timing was certainly
right, crazy timing.
Yeah.
But so this was maybe 2 years ago. We were driving back from Viroqua in September, and we played at this. It's a cool bookstore. It's a really cool bookstore.
Beautiful place.
Driftless Books in Viroqua, and they have acoustic shows. We played an acoustic show, and then it all gets done around midnight, and then we drive back to Madison, which is about an hour and 40 minutes from Viroqua, and it's all back roads. If you're going directly and not taking the freeway, it's all back roads. And what
the animal highway?
Yes.
Turns out
it's got to be 2:30 in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
We hit an owl.
Well, there was the lead up to that.
Right.
Because first, a small animal ran across in front of us.
Okay.
That was weird.
Like a squirrel or something.
Yeah.
Something.
Exactly. It's also middle of the night. Not a lot of animals are active at that
True.
point. Obviously some are.
Possum, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah. But so a small animal ran out, kept you awake. And then a minute later, I don't know if it was a fox or some other larger animal went across. Like, what the hell's going on? And then, yes, another minute later, and suddenly there's a huge owl with like a 6-foot wingspan. It's in front of the truck, flying, and we're catching up to it really quick.
It was scary.
And poor Mike was behind the wheel.
Like,
yeah.
Yeah. That was just. It was the series of events was strange, and that was when Scott and I were in the process of watching Twin Peaks.
Yeah.
Oh,
so we were especially, the
owls are not what they seem.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a sign.
Well, and the thing is, and we had just done an interview with Robbie Graham and Michael. He's got an Irish name. I can't think of it right now, but he wrote a whole book on the symbolism of owls and alien. Michael McClellan, and he's got a whole book on the symbolism of owls and alien abduction. And while we were reading about that book and doing research for the interview, I was reading about how if you damage an owl or you see an owl, owls are a bird of bad omen. And I was like, oh no, am I in bad luck because I hit this owl?
Or did you do a service if it's a negative?
But it felt like the rhyme of the ancient mariner or whatever. This is going to be horrible. So, but there was one other thing that happened when, so we've talked about this in the podcast in a different kind of context, because I've talked about this before in the idea of a tulpa, in that the thought created the form in reality. But the more I think about it, the more I think it might be some kind of spirit animal. And this happened at the Blarney Castle in Ireland in 2008. My wife and I go to Ireland, and we go to the Blarney Castle right outside of Cork. And you got to go to the stone. You kiss the Blarney Stone. It's super fun. And then you go in the forest around the Blarney Castle. There's this whole witches area. Like they say, they have a witches cave, and there's these wishing stairs. And if you can walk up the wishing stairs backwards, then the witch will grant your wish.
Ooh, that's cool.
It's really fun, and we go on like a Tuesday or something where we still had to wait in line to kiss the Blarney Stone, but most of the place was empty. So we're all alone in the witch's cave. We're walking the wishing stairs and everything. Nobody's there, and there's a little forest surrounding the Blarney Castle, and we're walking around it, just having a nice day, getting ready for a picnic. There's horses and shit like that. I mean, it's a pastoral kind of rural Ireland scene. We were living in the Irish Spring commercial that day.
Yeah.
And at the time, I'm reading Nick Redfern's book, Three Men Seeking Monsters. And it's where Nick and a few of his drinking buddies went all over England, and they were going to places where people had seen monsters and cryptids.
Fun.
And so
fun.
And so, like, as we're going around, I'm reading the book, and then I'm telling my wife about the book. And so this is from my journal that day. And I say, I told Chris, my wife, about these creatures called the Cormons that are in Nick Redfern's book, because I just finished it that morning. In his book, Redfern talks about interviewing an old witch who told him about the creatures, the Cormons. They were summoned to our world centuries ago by some British magicians and Irish occultists who were looking to protect the Isles from foreign marauders like the Vikings. These Cormons were supposed to appear as the darkest fears of the attackers, usually with glowing red eyes, and defend the island. But the magicians and the occultists were slaughtered, and the Cormons were free to roam the land and feed on our fearful emotions. He speculated that UFOs, ghost sightings, and other monsters were these Cormons who use our fear as a pathway from their dimension to ours. I was telling her about the Cormons and what an interesting idea I thought it was, and she said, "How scary would it be if the big black wolf from the never-ending story appeared right now?" I laughed, and as we looked towards the pathway, 100 yards from us, it looked like a wolf from a distance, like all black. I immediately took a picture with these cheap European phones we had. But as we approached it slowly, it was the form of a black cat. And I got a couple pictures of it, and then it jumped in the bushes before we had a good look at it. But I thought it was a wolf/dog, but she saw it as a cat the whole time. So it appeared differently to me than it appeared to her. We never really saw its eyes, but looked around for it. Where it jumped to, we didn't see anything. We couldn't believe what we'd just seen after we were talking about it. It couldn't have been written any better. Chris said that it might have been because of the wish she made when she was on the wishing stairs. I thought she might have wished that our black cat, Mr. Spock, who had ran away for 2 weeks, and we had to use a trap. We had used a trap to recapture it just a couple months before, was okay, and that's why a black cat appeared. But the shape looked like it was a wolf to me at first, which is why I thought it was completely strange. We were actually grateful for the experience, but the interesting thing was, years later, Chris told me that the reason that she was so struck by the appearance was that on the wishing stairs, she had asked for some kind of guidance for her career. Now, she'd been a music teacher for a couple years, but it was a very difficult schools in Madison, and she didn't want to do it anymore. And she had applied for a job at a cat care specialty place in Madison. And on the wishing stairs, she had asked for a sign.
Hmm.
And at the Blarney Castle, she got it.
Cool.
That is awesome.
So that was the spirit animal experience. So what I thought was a tulpa or whatever, like we created it by talking about the wolf from the Never-Ending Story, actually was a spirit animal of the cat. And then the year at the cat care clinic led to her going to law school and changing her life. But the thing is, I had thought for a long time that it was just like we created this thing out of our minds. And we might have, but it ended up being something positive. So, I mean, it might have been just a black cat walking around the place because it was empty. Great. You know?
Right. But like you said, you apply the meaning to it, you know?
And
Yeah.
that's
It got you to think about things. It got you to think, or it got her to think about the things that were bothering her and
right.
to make some decisions on it. And it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. So the spirit animal thing is an interesting kind of way to go. But I tell you, beyond spirit animals, we also have animals as, well, psychic themselves, and maybe harbingers of something a little bit darker. This idea of the hellhound.
There we go. Back to Robert Johnson.
Right. You know, this idea, and you know, Elliot O'Donnell talks about these a bunch in his Animal Ghost book. Particularly, you know, he talks about the people that have seen the hellhounds of England and Ireland. And they have, you're going to see a dog with black eyes, a black dog with red eyes. And if you see that, chances are you're going to die soon.
Oh.
But you know, people have seen phantom animals, whether it's you know, a black dog or the black cat crossing your path.
Sure.
And one of our Patreons, Chuck, in his book Stranger Than Fiction, saw a mysterious black animal where he was stationed, and he writes about it in the book. And let me read that real quick because I think it's the kind of story where you have somebody who's very practically minded seeing something that makes him question what he thinks is true. So it was a grand tradition to haze the new guys in the security police. Chuck had worked in the military police. My personal favorite was the fence line sensor test, where you'd send a gullible young airman out to a remote corner of the base to test the fence sensors. This meant having him pull on the fence, radioing in his position. Back at either the law enforcement desk or security control, a dispatcher would advise him if the sensors were working. Of course, there weren't any sensors, and the joke was seeing how long and how hard you could get an airman to pull and push on a chain link fence to trip the sensor.
Nice.
At Rhine, Maine, a slightly more sophisticated prank that involved a red-eyed monster. Young airmen were warned about the red-eyed monster early after arrival. This warning included a dissertation about how there were a number of wild boar that lived in the woods around the base and airport, and that maybe that's what people were seeing. But sure enough, once the airman got his first posting alone on night shift, a pair of glasses fitted with red plastic lenses were used to scare him from the darkness. I can personally attest to the existence of the wild boars. They did indeed come out at dusk and could be seen outside the base fence. At an off-base storage area we patrolled, I even managed to catch a pair in daylight, and my partner for the shift and I enjoyed feeding them and videotaping them at length. My partner Travis was from Texas and an avid hunter. He warned me that despite these pigs barely being knee-high, they were fairly dangerous and could hurt you. Some months later, I found myself assigned to a seldom-used vehicle gate in the southwest corner of the base, a gate that blocked an access road that led to the new control tower for the international airport. The force south of the airbase just reached this area, and a lone gate shack was set up to monitor traffic going back and forth from the airport to the base. During daylight hours, the gate was kept open, but at dusk it was closed and locked, as virtually no one used the road. One evening, as the sun was about to set, and I was growing tired of listening to Armed Forces radio after having secured the gate, I looked up from my gate shack and saw a couple of small boars run out of the woods from the south. They were just outside the perimeter fence and followed it to the gate before turning and going back. They were the typical skittish boars I had seen countless times before, even smaller than the ones I had videotaped off base. A very short time later, another boar emerged from the woods. This boar was like none I had ever seen in Germany. For one, it was easily 3 times the size of the other boars I'd seen. Its back was at least as high as my waist, and it surely weighed several hundred pounds. Unlike the mixed brown, grays, and blacks of the smaller boars, this specimen was all black, save for a single tuft of white hair sticking up from between its shoulder blades. It was enormous, bigger than any of the hogs I'd seen during the summers on my uncle's farm as a kid. The big boar wasn't running about like the smaller boars had. It trotted along slowly, clearly unafraid of anything. It too followed the fence line, but instead of turning back at the gate, it just snorted and crossed the road, eyeing me as I stepped out of the gate shack to watch it. In the dimming light, I could see the individual hairs on the pig's hide. I could see big tusks and little dark eyes glaring at me. I have to admit, it's the only time in my life I've been afraid of bacon. Once across the road, but still outside the perimeter fence, the boar continued to watch me as it leisurely made its way north, passing within 30 feet of me. On this particular day, I was armed with a Beretta M9 pistol. Law enforcement duty often meant just a sidearm. Unlike the Army MPs, security police actually carried live rounds in Germany, but that was a little consolation to me at the time. The big black beast was considerably larger than me, and I doubted that my handgun would be able to stop it if it decided to charge. I was particularly glad for the heavy steel gate that had blocked the boar's path onto the base. When the boar had reached a point 50 or so feet from the fence line from the gate, I breathed easier, and I reflected on the closed gate and the probable inadequacies of my sidearm. On my side of the fence, bushes and brush almost obscured the fence from view. There were a few trees, but they thinned out and faded away another 50 or so feet on. I was about to lose sight of this incredible creature, but was very thankful it was outside the fence line and that my gate had been closed. Immediately after I thought this, the boar stopped. He was barely visible now, the brush growing on the inside of the fence line casting long shadows in the fading light. But I could still see the boar and watched, stunned as it turned to its right and began walking towards the base, passing through the fence with ease. My hand went to the pistol on my belt as the boar vanished from sight, swallowed by foliage and shadow inside the fence line. I couldn't believe what I had just seen. No brush grew outside the fence. If it had continued to follow it, I could have seen it. But it had turned and walked right at the fence, then passing through it. I stood there for several moments trying to make sense of what had just happened. At last, I came to the conclusion that there must be a break, and that the enormous boar had slipped through and was now in the base, not far from me. I went back to my gate shack and called for a patrol for a restroom break. I nervously watched the woods north, waiting for the big boar to come slotting out over me. When the patrol finally arrived, I related what had happened and asked them to spot me for a few minutes. I wanted to go find that gap in the fence. As foolish as it sounded, I was actually concerned about a hole in the fence big enough for a boar to pass through without ducking rather than the fence or digging. And even though I was probably underarmed, I wanted to find that hole. I needed to find it. My relief would have none of it. If I wanted to go to the bathroom, that was fine, but they weren't hanging around while I looked for a hole in the perimeter fence. That was civil engineering's job. I could log it in the book, back at our dispatch when I got off duty. For many years, I would look back on this event and wonder about the strange boar I'd seen, never thinking it was anything other than some really big, wild bacon that crawled through a hole in the fence and vanished in the underbrush. It wasn't until recently that I came across the stories of black animals, mostly dogs, sighted around the world and began to wonder, was there really a hole in the fence back in 1992? Or did I see something much more than just a wild beast?
Oh, man.
Yes.
That's awesome.
That is. It reminds me that Linda Godfrey has a whole chapter about the black dogs, I guess you call them. But in her newest book.
Black dogs are seen at Bachelor's Grove Cemetery. Bob Jensen, a friend of mine, has seen one himself. There's also a legend of a green-eyed wolf type creature at Graceland Cemetery.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, there are other spooky phantom dogs like that, and wild boars are no joke. Even if they're in physical form, I think I prefer the ghost version, a spectral version, than a real one.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the thing is of like wild black animals giving people, some kind of bad omen. I mean, crows have that, and I mean the idea that the black cat crossing your path is definitely part of that. And Elliot O'Donnell talks about some of those legends and how they've been legends for a long time, the psychic properties of cats, in his Animal Ghosts book. But we have a more recent example of that with Oscar, the therapy cat, at the Steerhouse Nursing and Rehabilitation Center in Providence, Rhode Island. Geriatrician David Dosa in the New England Journal of Medicine wrote an article about how Oscar appears able to predict the impending death of terminally ill patients by choosing to nap next to people a few hours before they die. And they were trying to use science to be like, well, how does he have that ability? And I mean, some of the science was that he could pick up on the lack of movement in the patients. Like if they couldn't move, that's when he'd go there. I mean, the cat, sometimes when you're laying down, cats love when you're laying down. Or that he can smell the biochemicals released in dying cells. He even wrote a book called Making Rounds with Oscar, The Extraordinary Gifts of an Ordinary Cat. And I mean, after 6 months, the staff noticed that he would choose to nap next to residents who would die a few hours after his arrival. And Joan Tino, a physician, she said that, she's like, it's not that the cat is consistently there first, but the cat always does manage to make an appearance, and it always seems to be in the last 2 hours. And so after Oscar accurately predicted 25 deaths,
Wow.
staff started calling family members of residents as soon as they discovered him sleeping next to someone in order to notify them and give them an opportunity to say goodbye before the impending death.
Yeah.
As of 2015, it is believed that Oscar has accurately predicted 100 deaths.
That's amazing.
So, I mean, this idea in the past that a cat had some kind of psychic ability to predict death seems to have been borne out, at least, at this Rhode Island nursing home, this facility. And it's scary. It's scary. I don't want to sleep next to Oscar ever.
Yeah, I don't want to see Oscar walking into my room.
Right.
This does dovetail nicely into a final thought before we wrap this up, which is that, as you had mentioned earlier, Mike, that the cats have a sensitivity to the other side, and it's just kind of a natural thing for them, whereas dogs get freaked out by it, but they also can observe it. I'm surprised I don't see more dogs as part of ghost hunting teams. Because we always hear about the site of the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, dogs freak out around there. And Diane Ladley, who runs Naperville walking tours, she'll have once a week a dog-friendly version where people can take their dogs on a walk as they go through all the haunted places. And she always outfits people. She gives them EMF detectors as well. But what ends up happening is if something paranormal happens on the tour, the dogs actually start to perk up and freak out before the EMF detectors go off. And then once the EMF goes down, the dogs still seem to hold on to it a little bit longer before then going back to normal. So dogs are a more sensitive than our instruments. Yeah. So I'd say there should be more dogs in ghost hunts.
I think that's a great idea. I think Elliot O'Donnell would agree with you. 100 years. Actually, Elliot O'Donnell made it to like 1967.
Wow.
Yeah. So
he didn't see Oscar. Yeah.
No. So he made it to like in his 90s. So good on him. But this idea that these animals that we're so close to, and the idea that it was some kind of joke that you tell your kids that maybe the animal went to a better place, or your pet or your dog or your cat went to a better place and you'll see him again. Maybe that's right. And
Yeah, Rainbow Bridge,
right.
ain't no joke.
Yeah, and I hope it's right. So
Yeah.
anyway, everybody that contributed a story for this episode, thank you very much. I've got a horrifying story about a ghost that hurt an animal.
Man.
That will have to wait for an example when we talk about ghosts that can have like a physical reaction on people and creatures. But I got that when I requested stories about psychic animals.
All
and
right.
so that'll be a teaser for another episode.
Something to look forward to.
Yes. But everybody out there who joined us, hey, and if you're watching this later and you're interested in the kind of things we do, make sure you check out our Patreon community at patreon.com/sunspotmusic. We write songs about the topics that we talk about every week. We do paranormal conversations. And we also...
And you'll hear the song from this episode when the actual episode comes out.
Yep.
In our episode stream. So
right now we're having the conversation, and then in a few weeks we'll release the episode edited to make me sound more professional. And for everybody watching at home at YouTube today, thank you very much. Hope you guys
thank you.
have a great Sunday, and good luck to you. And if you have a dog or a cat, give them a big hug. Even if you have a pet pig, if you got a horse, give them a big hug. If you got a fish,
ear scratches.
Do not give the fish a big hug.
Oh.
But anything
and
else,
don't scratch its ears.
Make sure know. Make sure that they know that you're a good steward and you're happy to take care of them and you love them. So thanks very much. And next week, it's going to be Nick Redfern talking about the Rendlesham Forest. And in 2 weeks, we'll be with Earl Grey, MUFON's lead investigator for Southern California. And we're going to have some great entertainment and UFO stories for them. Until next time, we'll see all of you guys on the other side.
Yeah, thanks for tuning in.